Hello, good morning, everyone. After hearing Tom's wrap-up, I feel deeply deprived, having not had access to all of these amazing sessions over the last couple of days, but I'm quite honored to be here as your bookend. So it seems to me that this conference is, by its very nature, a testament to the revolution we're experiencing in teaching and learning. Gamification, online learning, digital portfolios, stealth assessment. These are transforming the way we think about education. And what I love about it is the shift from education as a transmitted knowledge model, right? So empty vessel is filled by the wise sage on the stage. And we're moving more and more, and you know this well, to learning, authentic learning that's about constructed knowledge, right? And so I ask you to think about your role as a learning agent in your organization and ask yourself, are you filling the pail? Are you lighting the fire? And so what are the hallmarks of the knowledge transition model that we're moving away from, both because we know our young people are disengaged and they're also ill-equipped? This model no longer serves them. It's about temporary retention, passive consumption. Content is siloed instead of a systems play. They are extrinsically motivated. It's decontextualized. And achievement focuses on the individual. What we need instead is to light the fire of curiosity, of intrinsic motivation, collaboration, resourcefulness, agency, systems thinking, experimentation, making things. Why is all that important? Well, we face an uncertain future. We are looking at unprecedented economic, environmental, and social challenges for which we will need creative, collaborative solutions. Alan Kay said that the best way to predict the future, let me start that quote again. Alan Kay said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. So who then are those inventors? Because we have a problem. Too many buckets, not enough fires. We can no longer rely on those outliers, right? The Steve Jobs, the Susan Sontag, whoever you think of as that outlier who's innovating perhaps despite the system, despite their schooling, not because of it. And instead, we need to transform into a generation of innovators who are driving those creative, collaborative solutions that are innovating us out of our current situation. And so in part, it's about those big global challenges that we face, but it's also about the future of work in more pragmatic terms. The future of work, equipping young people for the innovation economy. And what does that mean? Well, we know that 50% of the workforce will be freelancers by 2020. A quarter will be entrepreneurs, starting up their own thing, solving problems with their own unique business solution. And the remaining who find traditional employment will still be called upon to be the intrapreneurs. Have you heard this term, intrapreneur? Those who are agile, adaptable, creative problem solvers from within an organization, acting much like an entrepreneur would outside the organization. Those are the kinds of kids that employers are looking to hire and are finding it exceedingly difficult to identify. So there's a disconnect between the who, what, when, where, and why of schooling in America, secondary, post-secondary, and beyond, and what the world requires. So my own background, as you heard, is that of New York City public school classroom teacher. I went on to become a teacher of teachers at Teachers College Columbia University, and then worked for a network of international schools, initially as a kind of a year zero planner doing startup schools, and then at a national level as an EdTech innovations facilitator for the network. So that's That's my context. I know that we are all in the business of teaching and learning. It's just that our contexts are different. And so in those experiences, working across those communities of students and administrators and parents, teachers, I developed a tremendous amount of empathy and understanding, but none more than for the students themselves. And interestingly, whichever group I was listening to, looking at, investigating, whether it was the high school dropouts, those kids who are really at risk, who can't make it through high school, or the kids who succeed, get through high school, even go on to college, but can't get through college, right? And these are huge numbers. And then, of course, the real tragedy, or perhaps just one more tragedy, those who have the tenacity to get through both high school, both college, and come back and end up working at the local Duane Reade or the local drugstore. There's a problem. And the kids are calling it out. Across these disparate groups, different demographics, different age groups, they're calling it out. They're saying, I wish school was connected to the real world. So, it led me to this wondering. This how might we, which is going to be a phrase that's going to come up again in this talk. How might we was kind of that feeling of inspiration and opportunity in me that led me to ask, help kids create value in the real world. And so that whole long preamble was really a way to get at this slide, which is the crux of the talk today. And it is this. Innovation is often thought of as this mysterious black box. How do we arrive at innovative solutions? Well, there's actually a process that we can apply to arrive at innovation. And it is the process that I used, and you heard me just talking about, drawing from the empathy that I had gathered over the course of my career, and then more pointed empathy work as I went back out before launching this program that we call Breaker. And it's rooted in empathy. Empathy is the engine that drives innovation. So, in education, as I mentioned, we are distinctly separate from the drivers of innovation that are happening in the startup industry, in the design industry, and in industry sectors worldwide, nationwide. And so for me, the opportunity was to bring secondary and post-secondary education closer to those drivers of innovation. And I asked myself, what's the win-win? There's got to be win for the industry folks if they understand better how and why we're teaching. And there's win for certainly the students if they understand better and are better equipped to meet the needs of industry. So how do we bring these folks together? This is how we do it. We pose a design challenge, a big, meaty systems problem like manufacturing, which we call the future of stuff. We looked at manufacturing as a way to engage a local sponsor, someone who has interest in this space, who has vested interest in seeing talent developed, who understands this space, like in Portland, Oregon, for example, where we ran this challenge, because the Portland Development Commission had identified manufacturing as a key driver of their economy, and they wanted to see it grow. How could they see it grow? Well, they could bring together a think tank in a closed room, super smart people, head of their game, or they could bring in a bunch of kids who have this naivete, this beginner's mind, and lead them through a design-led social entrepreneurship program that will drive at innovations on the other end, beginning with empathy and resulting in innovations. So the future of stuff, it's like a sandbox that we create and then we invite others to come and play. It's like an excuse to bring teaching and learning out of the building and get corporates and others engaged in that process. And the how might we that drove this particular challenge was how might we build an economic base of producers as well as consumers, right? So the consumer economy is no longer serving us so well, it's stripping us bare. how might we also become a producer economy? That was like the big call to action. The best way to give you a glimpse of what a breaker project looks like is a little video, very short video, that captures what we did in Portland, Oregon last May. Sound? This is the first Portland breaker project.
We're here on the Concordia University campus in Portland, Oregon.
We've got 17 to 26-year-olds who are in all different stages in life.
It's got the manufacturing base, it's got the small makers. We wanted to see what would happen if we posed a challenge like the future of stuff.
The future of stuff.
To see how they could contribute value to the growth of making and manufacturing.
And we have 2 weeks to get that done. It's pretty intense.
So the students work on a longer timeline for 14 days, starting with a call to action with our project visionaries.
We talked to a lot of really interesting people. We got the students, the breakers, out into the world.
One of the most important principles of the work is developing empathy, connecting with the real needs of real people, and in order to do that you have to get out of the building and talk to people.
That things that people say, which is like, oh, well that's a good problem to have, it's still a problem.
Instead of taking materials, shredding them all up, melting them down, building something new out of it, you're taking something as it exists and finding a way to extend the life of it and keep on using it.
Kind of collecting information and looking at getting to know the people you design for.
The biggest challenge is it takes too long to go from the start to the finish.
And that also plays into efficiency. So efficiency is a huge challenge for us. Like, this is a business model that doesn't exist anywhere in the world.
We invited in a group of what we call professional development ride-along participants.
We are learning alongside the breaker team at the same time. So we're running parallel, but then we cross over and we interact with each other intentionally. So it's like intentional disruption.
Teaching you guys how to collaborate, that would be a key piece, because I agree that we don't do that as much in our system right now.
They get a glimpse of the student process, and then they have their own kind of, what does it mean to teach and facilitate this type of learning?
I get a lot of yes but or no but at school. The cool thing about Breaker is that everyone's like yes and that's really sweet.
At Bevel, we're trying to connect manufacturers with the skilled and talented employees that they need to grow their businesses right here in America.
Spread It is a web and mobile social media platform built to enable makers and small business owners to create beautiful content and reach a larger consumer market.
Introducing Guano, where we work with companies to go through their product line and figure out ways to adapt their products.
I feel Breaker prepared me by giving me a network of people who stimulated the idea process and who taught me how to think productively. If school was like Breaker, I'd probably stay until I was 40.
When you're able to create something with your hands and to take that idea out of your head, outside of the paper, you're able to see it visually, you're able to feel it and touch it, and it allows you to really see what works about that prototype or project and what really doesn't.
I feel like I have been more mentally engaged and challenged in these past 2 weeks than I have in my entire career of high school.
Okay, so as you can see, this is a project that worked across the city. We were able to engage local manufacturers, from high-tech manufacturers like Biamp sound systems to low-tech cut-and-sew shops, and the tool and die guys who are making the machinery that makes manufacturing possible locally, and everything in between. We are reaching out and saying, you are the local stakeholders for whom this type of learning will benefit. And of course, the kids get the benefit of the skills and the access that it provides. So let me show you what that ecosystem build looks like. It starts with the challenge. Okay, so this could come from a local visionary, a local organization, a foundation, a corporation. We choose the challenge, we negotiate what that might look like, and then we put a call out widely, social media style, and kids show up. They start applying. They apply for 15 spots on the team, and they range in age typically from 16 to 24. So this is not squarely in a high school, not squarely gap year, not squarely college, and we even have early career. So this is a very different way of working amongst each other, and it turns out to be one of the most valuable assets of the program. So once we have the challenge in place, we name the project visionaries, and you saw a little bit of that in with the Future of Stuff video, where we have that evening that kicks it all off. It is a night of inspiration. It is a night of visionaries in the space saying, here's what we're doing to innovate in the manufacturing space, whether it's Nike talking about fly weave, their revolutionary material, whether it's the business model that a cut and sew shop called Spool Town has put into place. These are folks who say, we've done some work here. Here are the other opportunities for you to go explore. There's a lot of wide open territory here. And that's part of why we choose particular challenges, right? We want to make sure that it's an open space for innovation, that there's a need there. There's not a clutter, like we don't need more coffee apps. We need solutions to real world problems. So we invite in the project visionaries to provide that inspiration. And then there's the creative capital. So there are all these local designers in any given urban hub. There are these local designers, whether they're industrial designers or product designers or experience designers, and they have a tremendous amount of insight around the process that we engage. So this isn't a content level engagement. We invite these folks in on a process level. Help us understand the brainstorming process. And of course, internally, the breaker facilitators could easily do this. We know how to do this, but it's much more robust when you're engaging local players. And guess what? When we pull out of this demonstration project, we want to have those folks engaged. We want them to remain engaged. So we outsource as much as we can. Business minds, local entrepreneurs, VC, anyone who can kind of put that business rigor to play. And you'll hear more about that a little bit later. Content collaborators. So as I mentioned, we have to go do the empathy work. We have to do site visits. We have to understand the real worlds of the real needs of real people by going out and shadowing them, learning from them, listening from them. So we invite in, or we ask them to invite us in to their sites so the kids can learn about the ways they work. And then physically, what you'd call our base camp or our classroom is really out and about in the world. We do have like one place that we circle back, and it tends to be different in every project. In Portland, for example, it was in a public library. In other instances, it could be in a corporate lobby. Sometimes it's in a storefront space. These are typically public spaces that demonstrate to the larger public the engagement happening there and the alternative learning happening there. So it's a way to kind of create buzz and get people's attention. So here are some of the challenges we've run recently. The Future of the Book Challenge, which had the team looking at literacy, particularly middle school literacy rates, and the drop that we see during those middle years, and that this is really a critical literacy period that we need to address with better tools and solutions. What they came up with there was a cell phone, an SMS-style novel, so parsed out lines of a novel that you could access through a GroupMe platform. So you're reading and responding to literature with your friends via your mobile phone. Interesting solution. The Urban Agribusiness Challenge resulted in a product called Farm Blocks, which is a portable modular raised bed growing system. The Technology for Civic Engagement Challenge resulted in an app where you could crowdfund local, hyper-local civic problems in your neighborhood that the local municipality was not addressing. And in the future of stuff, some of the products and services you heard just now on the video, MakerBox was particularly interesting. It's kind of like Birchbox. It's a subscription delivery box, but it has engineering toys so that you're introducing young kids to toys that are ultimately feeding the making and manufacturing movement, but much further upstream. So the skills demanded in the 21st century economy, and this is Tony Wagner's work, this is Angela Duckworth combined, these are kind of the buzzwords you hear associated with the future of work, that kids need to have empathy and tenacity, they have to be able to collaborate and experiment, agility, adaptability, critical thinking, analyzing information. I mean, we know all of this. There's a lot of buzz about this, but there's less clarity about how we teach these skills, and even less clarity still around how we measure. So at Breaker, we like to think that we are training kids to create value. So yes, we're training them in a particular set of skills, and yes, we have ways of gathering data around that and showing evidence. But what we're really after is a sense that they can contribute value, whether it be in the form of a startup idea as a solution, whether it's the value that they can contribute to a corporation, to a job that they're hired into, and of course, the idea that they have some agency in addressing these entrenched global problems that we face today. And it requires a shift from passive to active learning. This is self-directed, inquiry-style learning. We set the challenge broadly, but they have to identify the problem worth solving, and they are constantly moving, iterating, adapting, and I'll talk more about that, but it is a very active, there's very little passivity. Not to say that there aren't those moments where there is wisdom to be gained by that sage on the stage, that person who has to impart wisdom, but it's not the only modality. There's a shift from solitary to collaborative work. This is a very collaborative process, and that is not an easy process. In fact, this is probably the hardest thing to teach and the most valuable of all the skills that we emphasize. Because really good collaboration is what drives insights and innovations. And too easily, collaboration can become groupthink, where everybody's kind of yesing each other and they want to avoid any kind of tensions, or it breaks down altogether and you have some kind of interpersonal thing going on. You've got to be able to lean into the tensions productively, and that takes a lot of finessing from a facilitator. Jonah Lehrer said that it's the friction that creates the sparks, and we really train them to accept that as a mantra in this type of collaborative work, that it's going to be fraught with tensions, and that's okay. The curricula is fluid, and this is a really hard one to get teachers to accept. Because yes, there is a framework, and yes, there is a methodology, and there's a process we follow, but so much of it is dynamic, so much of it is sourced on the fly, that you can't have it scripted out in advance. And as you can hear, it's a move from centralized schooling, right, the school that happens in the building in the classroom, and that's that, to a distributed learning model, distributed across multiple networks of designers and local entrepreneurs and business leaders. These are some of the spaces we work in. They're crazy. They're hacker spaces and maker spaces and co-working spaces and business incubators. They're not traditional classrooms, but there's a tremendous amount of peer-to-peer learning just by virtue of being in these spaces, working side by side with other interesting innovators. So interestingly, there was so much interest in our student model that teachers and other professionals, namely like the executives from the corporations who were sponsoring the work, were like, wow, can we like sit in? Can we come and not just be a mentor for a couple of hours or a day, but can we actually like learn about the methodology? So we said, yeah, and we added this outside group, the represented here in yellow. The breakers are kind of in the center in their flex space. This would be an example of what would pop up in any kind of corporate lobby or an open space setting like a library. And so those corporates and teachers and administrators or whoever they are who have expressed interest in the model are coming and they're riding along. They're learning about the process to and from the students. Wow, that's a big reversal, right? Teachers learning from the students. We also take them through kind of a parallel design thinking workshop, but they work in tandem in this really interesting, unique, collaborative space. And we've also started, there's been so much interest in the teacher and executive standalone piece that now in our headquarters in New York, we do a 2-day workshop just for educators, administrators, and executives. So it's in the spirit of prototyping, we've really listened to the demand and been responsive as an organization to try to meet that demand. So let's take a closer look at the methodology. You've heard some mention of design thinking. Breaker really sits at the nexus of design thinking, challenge-based learning, which goes back to John Dewey and experiential learning, and startup entrepreneurship. So interestingly, coming at this hypothesis of an idea where I said to myself, as I mentioned to you in the beginning, where I was like, how can we help kids connect with industry? How can we help them create value in the real world? And I started to kind of cobble together this idea. It was through exposure to design thinking really just by reading about it and hearing about it. I had never gone through anything in particular in any training myself. Startup entrepreneurship, incubators were bubbling up everywhere 6, 7 years ago. And I would, in New York in particular, co-working spaces and incubator spaces, and I saw this incredible peer-to-peer network that they represented, and I thought it was really interesting. And challenge-based learning was just part of my DNA because that's the style of teaching that I'd always been attracted to, this kind of real-world learning. So I just want to call this out that like I had no expertise, very little expertise, except in the area of challenge-based learning, which is where my own history was, and I just kind of leaned in to these unfamiliar domains to learn what I could because I had a hunch that this was going to be important to that solution that married industry and education. So the kids, as I said, come from all over, and they range in age from 16 to 24. And we're looking for a diverse range of kids who are going to come at problems from different angles and different life perspectives, different points in time in their lives. So unless we work with a particular organization that says, hey, we have a relationship, an existing relationship with a set of high schools, and can you work with those folks? And we say yes. If we have the opportunity to open it up nationwide, we do that. And here's what our process looks like. It starts with inspiration, as you heard me mention. It's deeply rooted in empathy. We go through a synthesis process, ideation, prototyping, iterating, and pitching. There are many different ways to think about design thinking. There's no one lockstep process, but it all kind of encapsulates the same general idea. I'll talk a little bit more about each of these. So that inspiration piece, this is the beginning of our Future of Urban Agriculture Challenge, where Majora Carter, founder of Sustainable South Bronx, and Daniel Gould of Food and Tech Connect provided that inspiration point. Now, I have the great fortune of being a TED Fellow and having access to these amazing visionaries, but we all have access to visionaries in our communities. And so I'm constantly reminding people to tap their local resources, people who are doing interesting, innovative work, and will inspire other young people not to just sit passively and listen to the great work of said visionary, but to kind of tear that idea apart. Like, that's always my instinct when I'm at TED, is to like take that beautiful talk that's wrapped up in a silver bow and deconstruct it and tear it apart and bring that beginner's mind that millennials so often lend to bring new insight and new innovations. So it's not just about the work of the visionary, it's not just about ideas worth spreading, it's ideas worth activating. That's always been my approach, and that in fact was a big inspiration point for me in starting Breaker. So empathy, walking a mile in someone's shoes, getting out into the real world to understand the real needs of real people. So in the Urban Agriculture Project, for example, they had to talk to growers and shippers, sellers, consumers. They had to understand the needs of stakeholders across the spectrum. Once they did that, they would seek stories. So it's not rocket science here, people, right? But it is nuanced, and it does take practice. It's like a muscle that you exercise and get better at, driving real insights out of this work. So you seek stories, and you get better and better at this. Like, what can you get people to reveal? Tell me about a time. Can you give me an example? And then what? Or why? Of course, always paying attention to the discord, right? Like, when does the story not jibe with the action? Those are particularly telling moments. And you get really good at this. And we send them out time and time again to collect stories. We have them fanning out across those sites, talking to extreme users. So in the literacy challenge, for example, we don't talk to every type of user, but if you look at extreme users, it really amplifies needs. So you want to look at, say, the non-reader, the kid who hates to read in middle school, the self-professed hate-to-read kid, as well as the voracious reader. And because those needs are amplified, you're going to be able to extract insights that apply across the middle. This team is working as a cohort across all of that data gathering phase. So when they come back together, we have this massive storytelling session where they say, I met this person, I heard this story, I thought it was interesting that. And we begin to synthesize. We come together, we start mocking up, we create a war room is what it's called. We start mocking up with Post-its, saturating the space, developing user profiles, looking for themes and patterns. Because we have to make meaning of all that chaos. You've heard a lot of things out there, but when you start to hear the repetition of a particular idea or a particular need, you start to call that out, and then things get rearranged, and patterns start to form. And it's at that point that the students will then fracture into smaller groups. So they work as one cohort for a period of time, and then once they arrive at the problem they think is worth solving, or the number of problems they think are worth solving, they will find that project, that smaller group, a triad, a dyad, and they'll move forward from there as a smaller group, probably looking at something like 3 to 5 different problems worth solving in said space, whether it's manufacturing or literacy or urban agriculture. And then they ideate, so that you can see that it's kind of this process of divergent thinking and convergent thinking. They go really tight and then really wide. We're going to take it back out now. We've identified, of all that chaotic data, we've identified a few problems worth solving, and now we're going to imagine the possible solutions to that problem. We're going to let ourselves go wild. So this is the brainstorming phase. This is where everything is open, and we encourage them to be generative. And we do a number of exercises that get them into a generative mode where we're not dismissing each other with yes, but we're encouraging a yes and stance. And in that way, we're building on each other's ideas, getting to interesting innovations. In that process, we're inviting in a whole host of other partners. We're not alone in a room. We are out in the design studios because they do this work every day. Who better to help us drive at Insight than Frog Design, or Smart Design, or IDEO? Until we're ready to prototype something. And with prototyping, you say, fail early, often, and cheaply. So for example, as an organization, we are not just teaching this process to our kids, right? We are also using it ourselves as an organization. So what did we learn in the prototyping phase for, say, our digital portfolio? Well, guess what? Nobody sits down at the computer during an experiential learning boot camp that has them practically working around the clock for 2 weeks. They just don't sit down at the computer. And so we knew we needed a mobile solution, right? We were just not getting the digital portfolio work. We had uploaded the skills and competencies and rubrics, so it was all completely transparent to them, and we were just getting like a few words of dribs and drabs here and there. Not successful. So we learned from that, and what did we do? Well, we knew there needed to be a mobile solution. This particular portfolio company didn't have a mobile solution, so we built a little Twitter hack where we could push to them, we could push our participants in the field with prompts, and by hashtagging the skill that the prompt related to, they would respond and it would automatically get uploaded to the folder within their portfolio. Now, it's not a complete piece, but it's an asset. And it's a seed that can later be developed when they do sit down at the computer. But that was our quick and dirty prototype that was going to push our portfolio and assessment piece to the next level. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, hacking together simple solutions that tell you, are we on the right track here? And in fact, we tripled the engagement with the portfolio. So indeed, yes, we're on the right track. So we're going to continue to prototype that. And the point here is that we're building to learn. You're not building to prototype, you're not building to validate that you're right, that your design is right. You're building to learn more, right? You're putting some crude, it could be cardboard, it could be a mock-up where like you took chairs and set up the room, a piece of paper, a storyboard, the simplest, crudest form of a prototype that allows you to engage in conversation with your end user and gather more information. Because as you test that prototype, test like you know you're right, prototype like you know you're right, test like you know you're wrong. As you're out there prototyping, you're also gathering more empathy. And so it's a recursive process. You're right back where you started. And you can enter into this process at any stage. I suggested that we start with empathy and go through it kind of in a rather linear way, but in truth, like if I had a fully formed idea that I was ready to put into a prototype, I could start there because it's going to get me right back into empathy. It's just going to be a quicker cycle. So it's a totally recursive process. So testing, what worked, what didn't, new ideas, new questions. And so here are 3 case studies of students who've gone through the program and some of the outcomes that we've seen. The first is Kenyatta. He was on the Urban Agriculture Challenge. So Kenyatta was a young man from Philadelphia. He was a high school dropout. He, since dropping out of school, was doing his GED and got really involved in greening initiatives in his local city, in his area. So he had a lot of on-the-ground experience working with groups, working with community projects. When he came to Breaker and found himself on a team with, say, Ivy League graduates, kids who had been much more conventionally successful in school than he had been, he was admittedly really intimidated. And yet what was so interesting and what emerged from this experience was that he had the real-world knowledge. He had the applied learning. He had been out in the real world working with people, doing community-based organizing. So when they went out into the field to talk to people and try to extract meaning and insight from all that empathy work, he was really the driver of that whole process, giving him a very different notion of himself and his ability to both drive a project and provide insight for his colleagues, for his classmates. So I like to think of him as learning to learn, like a different way of thinking about learning. And he became the founder of, after 3 months, this product called Farm Blocks, which I mentioned before. And this is a very quick video that talks a little bit about Farm Blocks.
My name is Juliette LaMontagne. I'm the founder of Breaker. And Breaker is a design-led social entrepreneurship program. Each breaker project is a 3-month discrete project that answers a single challenge. The challenge comes from what we call our project visionaries. These are experts in the field who provide context and inspiration in kind of a TED-style talk that kicks off the 3-month journey. There, the team will meet for the first time and hear the visionaries present talks, and they'll have to decide how they're going to interpret those talks and apply it to their work as they look to design a product or a service as a solution to that challenge. It starts with the challenge, and then the team goes into discovery mode. So we go out and we do this human-centered design research, which is based in ethnographic research and deep empathy work.
In the process, we're connected with lots of think tanks, cool design firms in the city to help us along the way. So it's a lot different than coming up with an idea as a bunch of students, because we actually have the resources to make it happen.
From there, we come back to our headquarters here at Q Labs and share the data. Marking up this wall with all of our insights and stories that we've gathered out in the field. And then from there, we start building.
A farm block is just a regular milk crate that's lined with a specialized landscaping fabric that allows you to grow in pretty much any situation.
Finally, we have culminating pitch night where we present the product to an audience of investors.
Breakers really taught me that I could utilize this network of people that I've come in contact with my past 4 years in college and do whatever I want. I could actually engineer my own opportunity.
School is great and being in the classroom is great, but I wish that I was outside making things actually happen, and Breaker was the perfect answer for that.
After going through the process, I have a much better understanding of how people think about things and how sensible creative design is.
I've always felt passionately about transforming or activating TED's ideas worth spreading, because so often, you're inspired by these talks and then you leave the conference and that's about that. So I have engineered for that by saying, here's a TED visionary, here's a challenge, here's something to be solved. Let's learn about the design process as a way to solve that challenge, and at the same time, engineer career opportunities for yourself by launching a startup.
So these are admittedly small groups of kids, but we use them as demonstration projects, and we train a group of educators around them so that they then take that challenge back to their schools. And that's precisely what we're seeing in the cities that we've popped up in, like Boise, and Portland, and Detroit, and New York, and in San Francisco. So this is Ross, and he joined our Future of Literacy, or Future of the Book project, one of the first challenges we ever ran, and was really interested in learning the culture of work and looked to these engagements with our corporate partners as opportunities to get a foot in the door, to make himself known as a creative, as someone who stands above the rest and actually embodies the skills and competencies that we know employers are looking for. And so perhaps it's no surprise that he ended up working for Google, which is one of our partners for that project. And this is Aviva. And Aviva is just one of those kids who wants to be the change, She has like huge heart, huge passion, and wants to get involved in big, massive change, social change. Problem is that she doesn't always know what ideas to follow on and how to follow. Like, what is going to be impactful? How does she do good, not just do good, but do good effectively? So, one of the things that we teach the breakers is this idea of desirability. Does it meet a real human need? Feasibility. Can we build it now? And viability. Is someone willing to pay for it? Because if someone isn't willing to pay for it, then you're going to seriously limit the impact of your solution. So again, we're not emphasizing nonprofit solutions here. These are meant to be commercially viable products and services that are being designed. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't be a nonprofit solution. And of course, there's an irony there because we're a nonprofit solution, but it has to have an earned income revenue model. We have a firm emphasis on sustainability. And so that's how we get at this. That's how we take those kids, those passionate millennials who want to do good in the world, and help them to refine their ideas filtered through these three lenses of desirability, feasibility, and viability. And then again, our business experts, represented on the right there, come in and kind of put them through the test and hold it up and stretch it out and look at their business model and see if it's going to work. These are the mindsets that come from the D School at Stanford University, the Institute of Design at Stanford University, from which most of this design thinking work comes from. And we are close partners in the work. We developed the Future of Stuff Challenge together in the open source course content that lives at thefutureofstuffchallenge.org, in case you're interested. And in the end, I think these are the critical mindsets that we're after. It's about being human-centered, putting human needs at the center of our design processes all the time, at every stage in the process. Did we get away from our user? You know, like we keep the user profile up in the war room for the entire project, and every time we make a decision that feels like we're veering away, we have to go back and say, what did Joe say? Would Joe agree with this? Do we need to go talk to Joe or someone like Joe? So human-centered, making sure that end user is front and center for every stage of development. A bias toward action, and boy, this is a tough one. We all fight inertia, especially in big organizations. Just do something. If you have an idea, if you have a hypothesis about how something might work, if you've been the empath at your organization for a number of years and you've had a sense of how to implement change, show bias toward action. Take one small step to getting that idea into manifest form and getting it out there to be tested. Be mindful of process. When you're running this kind of a collaborative session, you have to know when to diverge and when to converge. You have to know when people need to be encouraged to speak up and when others have to step back and so forth. You have to know where you are in the cycle and what the appropriate modality is. Radical collaboration. You have to have diverse minds coming from ideally diverse disciplines, certainly departments, right? Or you're just going to get groupthink. Show, don't tell. Put everything in physical form. And I think Tom was a great example of that, right? So we take notes at meetings and then walk away with, probably 10 different ideas about what the action steps are. Draw collaboratively on the table. That's what we do. A culture of prototyping. Again, putting ideas out there and creating value. Like I said just a minute ago, making sure that your ideas are desirable, feasible, and viable. And above all, fail forward. Embrace failure as an opportunity to learn. This is a picture of the breakers inside an advertising company called Wieden & Kennedy in Portland, Oregon. And this is, as you can see, a massive wall that represents their company culture. It says, fail harder. Because this is the heart of the creative process. Experimenting and taking risks and learning and iterating and pushing forward. Very different message than we get in schools today. Human-centered design. As I said, making sure that human needs are at the front and center of the design process. So to recap, as I mentioned, the breaker process is kind of a fusion of a couple of different things, and that's why we include that piece about pitch and reflect, whereas you don't get that in a traditional design thinking methodology. We make sure that kids have to stand in front of an audience at the end to pitch their products or services. But IDEO, the design firm that has a very close relationship with the D School at Stanford, uses different labels. And I just say this to say that you'll hear it with a lot of different labels, a lot of different names. It's the same process. But this particular way of phrasing it, maybe it will just spark something in you. So I'm going to take you through the same process as IDEO articulates it. The discovery phase being about encouraging curiosity and exploration. So getting out of your domain and looking for creative inputs elsewhere. I can't say enough. Whether it's your Twitter feed, like get out of your, what's it called? Filter bubble. Get out of your filter bubble and get into the spaces of other people talking about other either adjacent or way out in left field topics. This is going to infuse the creative process. Interpretation helps you find opportunities and focus, right? So until we look at all of that data and begin to interpret it, we're not going to know which step to take forward. Ideation lets us be highly collaborative. At some point, you want to invite others into whatever that nascent idea you might have out there right now. You need others to break it apart with you. Don't rest comfortably in your solution. Break it back open. Go wide before you decide. Prototyping, we've talked a lot about, encourages experimentation. And evolution, which is about having the optimism and the courage to continue to push forward despite failings and shortcomings of your idea. And so, in closing, I want to return to this idea of empathy, because it is my firm belief that you, as the learning agents in your organization, are well poised, more than well poised, to be the empaths, right? You've got your finger on the pulse of the entire organization. So how do you use that, and how do you catalyze it in others? And together come up with the how might we statements that are going to drive innovations for your own organization and beyond. So I encourage you to be the catalyst of innovation yourself and to catalyze it in others. Thank you.